श्रीमद महाप्रभु की जय। श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद्-भागवतम की जय। श्री भ्रमर-गीत की जय। गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। गौर प्रेमानंद हरि हरि बोल। Pranam to all of you from Sri Dham Jagannath Puri. Again, sharing this recording not live, unfortunately, because of the difference of local timing in India and other parts of the world. Somehow, nonetheless, happy to share with you in one way or another. So we are continuing today with our series of lectures of Sri Bhramara-gita. Today is meeting number 20. We have this and two more meetings in front of us. Finish, quote unquote, at least officially, the series of the Song of the Bumblebee. So today we will be studying verses 61 to 63 from chapter 47, 10th canto of the Bhagavatam. The last three verses, the second half of the song of Uddhav called Uddhav-gita, the song, he bids farewell from Braj before returning to Mathura. But as usual, first of all, let's make a brief recap of what we were studying last Monday, where we started to see the first part of the Uddhav-gita, as well as certain verses recited by Sukadeva Goswami after basically the Gopis' reply to Krishna's message. So in our fourth meeting of conclusion, previous meeting, We were studying verses 53 till 60. And there, after the last verse where the gopis end their reply to Uddhava and Krishna, Sukadeva Goswami tells to Parikshit that the gopis finally were fully relieved or saved, we could say, because of certain messages sent by Krishna. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur clarifies here that actually the official messages that appeared in the Bhagavatam were not the only ones, basically, because till the last message that Krishna sent to the gopis through that appears in the Bhagavad, the gopis reply, and the last verse where the gopis express themselves, they didn't seem quite relieved yet. And suddenly now Sukadeva Goswami is saying, now the gopis were fully relieved. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur mentioned there were actually other messages sent by Krishna through that do not appear in the Bhagavad, but Vishwanath mentioned some of them in his purports. And these were the ones who finally somehow relieved the gopis from their pain of Virahagni, of the forced fire of separation from Sri Hari. So being relieved in this way, the gopis worship Uddhava with gratitude for being a representative of their beloved. And Uddhava, in reciprocation to that, stays in Vrindavan for almost a year, like in between 10 and 11 months there, doing parikram, and therefore establishing the standard for what we know today as Brajamandal Parikram, which implies visiting the different lila stalis, past spots of pastimes, and getting absorbed in whatever happened in that particular sector of Braj. So he's wandering for almost a year like a bumblebee, buzzing here and there, totally intoxicated by drinking the wine of the Brajavasis Association. So Sukadeva Goswami described how this whole year was spent very quickly. The whole year passed like a moment. For Uddhava, for the Brajavasis. The two of them were fully enjoying their association and experiencing Krishna's presence back in Braj, directly there. So before leaving Vrindavan and returning to Mathura, it is described how Uddhava offers 6 very important, famous historical prayers, songs called Uddhava-gita. Of course, he offered more than 6, but these are the 6 that appear in the Bhagavatam and that are compiled. Sanatana Goswami quotes them. His Brihad Bhagavatamrita and different Gaudiya Vaishnavas used to memorize them, recite them daily as part of their sadhana and so on, where Uddhava establishes very important, conclusive Gaudiya statements about the superiority of Vrindavan conception, of the Gopis love, of the notion of Sri Radha about Sri Lakshmi, of Braja about Vaikuntha, of Raja Krishna about Sriman Narayan, and so on. And of course, all of this is being said by Uddhava, who is considered as the greatest authority to speak this type of things, greatest jnani, greatest sage, great devotee, who is pointing to the gopis as the greatest of all devotees. So in the first of these 3 verses that we saw last Monday, he first is saying, among all persons on earth, the gopis have attained the highest possible limit of achievement, of attainment. Their ultimate potential of the Atma, embodied Atma, is to reach where the gopis have reached. And this attainment is hungered after by those who aspire for liberation, liberated beings, and devotees as me, basically. So he's glorifying the attainment of the gopi, and basically then he says, for one who has a taste for this, for speaking about the attainment of the gopis, the love of the Brajavasis, Kim Brahmajan Mavina Nantakatara Sasya. And so what's the use, basically, of being born as a Brahmana? What's the use of being born as Sri Brahma himself? Or what is the use even of Vedic knowledge in the connection of Dharma, Varnashram, Sankhya, Upanishadic statements, which lay far away from what a Harikatha can take us. So these gopis have attained the ultimate apex of Ruda Bhava and Mahabhava for Sri Hari. So this is the first verse which somehow contextualizes the remaining verses that are part of this Uddhava-gita, which remember, there's a second Uddhava-gita in 11th canto where Krishna instructs Uddhava, similar to how he did with Arjuna. That's the second Uddhava-gita. The first one are these 6 verses found in this section. In the second verse, Uddhava speaks with certain irony, if you will, saying that how amazing is that these simple cowherd village girls have attained the highest possible limit of love. Apparently, they seem to be degraded by deviant behavior, but they have attained such an apex. And Krishna's mercy is such that it acts as a powerful medicine, which is effective even if you don't know its ingredients. So basically, here Sriman Uddhav used the term Vyavichara Dusta, which means like someone, again, like corrupted by deviant behavior. In this case of ladies, Vishwanath speaks of 3 of them. A lady who has a husband but goes with a lover, the most condemned example. A lady who leaves her husband to go to her lover, a not so condemned example, if you will. And a lady who leaves her husband to join Krishna in the context of him being a lover, Parakiyabhava, the most praiseworthy case and situation, totally hankered after by sadhus. So the point is, there's no deviation whatsoever in the gopis parakya, even though it may seem some deviant behavior. And similarly, Uddhav says this other thing: as a powerful medicine is effective even when smelled, even ingested. Similarly, in my case, Uddhav says, I feel Krishna is giving me so much mercy by having taken me to Vrindavan and giving me the darshan of the Brajavasis law, even though I'm not able to ingest such a medicine, but just remaining near them, like smelling the medicine, is totally creating conversion in me. Such mercy my master has shown, Uddhav says. And finally, the 3rd verse we studied in our previous meeting establishes the gopis' superiority from another side, by establishing the superiority of Rasa Lila as the crown jewel of all the pastimes in Braj, and because it establishes at the same time the highest reach of the gopis and Sri Radha's in particular love for Krishna. So in this verse, Sriman Uddhav Mahasaya is saying, Krishna put his arms around the gopis' necks in the context of Rasa Lila, and such a favor was never bestowed upon Lakshmi nor upon the ladies of these heavenly planets, and what to speak of the ladies from the material world. So the goddess of fortune, Srimati Lakshmi Devi, the very epitome of chastity and purity and devotional femalehood, if you will, she, the goddess of fortune, was not so fortunate as to receive such a favor. Even when she tried to enter the Rasa Lila, as we shared the story, she was not able to do so, while the gopis did. So this verse, as we will see some others today, establish the superiority of the Rasa Lila, the superiority of the gopis above Lakshmi. Actually, they are the Lakshmi, the Prema Lakshmis of Vrindavan, very gaudy upon the game, establishing the superiority of Swayam Bhagavan, Braja Krishna, Bhog Narayan, and so on. So, a brief recap. We'll continue today with the 3 remaining verses from the Uddhav-gita, verses 61, 62, and 63, from this 47th chapter of the 10th canto. So I will recite each of them in Sanskrit first, and then we will go to the translation as usual. So the first verse says like this. Verse 61. Asamaho charanudej sammansham Vrindavana kimapi malato shadina Jadustajam sajanamaripatam chahitra Bhejur mukundu padavim Shrutibhir vimrejam. Sri Uddhav says, the gopis of Vrindavan have given up the association of their husbands, sons, and other family members who are very difficult to give up, and they have forsaken the path of chastity to take shelter of the lotus feet of Mukunda, Krishna, which one should search for by Vedic knowledge. Oh, let me be fortunate enough to be one of the bushes, creepers, or hairs in Vrindavan, because the gopis trample them and bless them with the dust of their lotus feet. So this is probably the most well-known verse of this Uddhav-gita, and one of the most famous verses from the Bhagavatam, in which the superiority, glory of the gopis is established by someone so glorious and superior like Uddhav himself. And he's explaining why the gopis are so glorious. What are those things that they have given up, which speaks about their detachment, which at the same time speaks about their attachment, because they are getting detached in such a comprehensive way from everything that is the most difficult thing to get detached from, that such extreme detachment actually is speaking about their extreme attachment. in relation to which detachment is just but a corollary aspect. So they transgress, if you will, everything: dharma, society, opinion of the world, family, all the main attachments that tie us to this world, just to run after the flute call of Sri Krishna. And therefore, very importantly here, Uddhava will pray to be born in Braj. And he mentions three options: bushes, creepers, or herbs, something in that connection in Braj, so he can enter in touch. He can be stepped on by the lotus feet of the gopis and receive the dust from their lotus feet. So let's try to unpack the context of this verse a little bit, not as comprehensively as I would like because we don't have enough time, but we will try our best. By quoting, as usual, the commentaries of our Purvacharyas, Sanatana Goswami Pad, Jiva Goswami, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Sridhar Swami, and so on. Srila Sanatana Prabhu mentions to begin with that by observing the glories of the gopis, by describing those glories in his own words, and by meeting the gopis in person, Uddhava now is completely absorbed in the gopis' special mode of loving Krishna. So here we find Uddhava especially affected and influenced by some scars gained in association with the Braja gopis. Less than 1 day till now, as we know, but still enough. No? It's not about quantity, but quality. The power of some scar and how much receptive we are to that. So here we find a very fit combination among these two sides, Uddhava and the gopis. So because of that, Uddhava becomes totally affected by the mood of the gopis. We will see in which particular way. So Srila Sanatana Goswami Pad say that in this exalted state, Sri Uddhava has now discovered his true heart's desire, which in this verse he prays to achieve as the final fruit of all the service he has done for Krishna. So he considers in full humility, if during all this time I have done something useful in the service of my master Sri Krishna, then may the fruit of all that be what I'm praying for here, to be born in Braj as some of these so-called insignificant species in any of them, so I can receive this most significant food dust from the Braja Gopikas. So some of you may be reminded by hearing this prayer about Brahma's prayer. In Brahma's stuti after the Brahma Vimohan Lila, where he's praying to be born as whatever in Braj, to receive the dust from anyone in Braj. In one sense, his prayer is a little bit more generic. Born as whatever, to receive the dust from whoever. Although, interestingly, we know he has an affinity for Sakyabhava, but he's praying in a more generic way here. Similarly, we'll see Uddhava has already Sthayi. His case is different from Brahma. Brahma is a sadhaka. In the context of becoming a sadhana siddha, we know this pastime, while Uddhava is a nitya siddha who has already Sthayi, an established emotional disposition towards Krishna. So in that sense, it's impossible for him to change that. So his prayer to become affected by the Gopis Baba, we'll see in which sense he's saying that. So Sanatana Goswami says that although this prayer by Uddhava is similar to that of Brahma, actually Uddhava's prayer is different from Brahma's, because Brahma does not have the same type of service attitude of Uddhava. He says, since Brahma has 4 heads, he cannot remain in Braj for long. His 4 heads will be too much of a disturbance for the Nara Lila, human-like atmosphere in Vrindavan. There's no place for too much overtly extraordinariness. No? You can appear with 4 heads and Krishna's friends will joke on you for a while, and then you have to disappear, because if not, that will create too much of a rasabas, or a disturbance in the natural cowherd village mood there. Therefore, Brahma is praying to a birth as something, somewhere, to attain the dust from anyone in Braj, a more generic type of approach. Uddhava, however, Sanatana Goswami says, is praying for a service attitude like the gopis. He's not praying to become a gopi in Banjari or something himself, but he's praying for some service attitude like the gopis with a special bhava for Krishna. In other words, his main focus of service is Sri Krishna. He's in Dasya Bhava with some tinge of Sakya for Krishna in Mathura, eventually in Dwarka. So he's praying for a service attitude, or in other words, the intensity. He's not praying to attain Gopi Bhava again, but to become imbued with intensity, emotional intensity of the passionate feelings of the Braja Gopikas, and all of that may affect his own Sthayi Bhava, which is already fixed for time without beginning in relation to Krishna. He's praying with full longing here. The very verse starts with the word aho. So aho generally indicates some lamentation, but with some greed for something very rare. So this is what Uddhava is praying for here. Some lamentation in the context of feeling himself very wretched, very fallen in comparison to the gopis' love, but at the same time very undeserving. I don't deserve this, but with lots of longing and greed for attaining that, feeling this is a great grace that I received through them and through my Master Krishna who sent me here, so I cannot but pray for that somehow, may that bhava enter in my bhava and affect it. Although it's something very rare, it's very much above my head, but some greed has come by their mercy. Some commentators also mention that at this point Uddhava is thinking about touching the lotus feet of Sri Radha. Remember, all this is in the context of the Bhramara-gita, and Bhramara-gita is the main, Bhramara-gita will be the main act, if you will, of this section. So, in this connection, one second, please. So in this connection, Sri Uddhava is thinking, touching the feet of Radha, who has spoken this Bhramara-gita, but she won't allow any man to touch their feet apart from Krishna. That's an important point that we are to understand. Uddhava wants to touch that with reverence, with Aishwarya, if you will, but we know that Sri Radha, the only person, not even Abhimanyu, has a chance of touching Radha's feet. Krishna himself is touching her feet. He is not touching anyone else's feet, actually, nor other gopis and so on. So Krishna touched Radha's feet, as Jayadeva mentions. Dehi pada palavam udaram. Krishna is putting his head on Radha's feet. He worships those feet. He paints those feet. He decorates those feet. He prays to obtain dust from Sri Radha's feet, which is a very high conception of God himself surrendering to love, if you will. So in that sense, it's that Uddhava is praying to become a bush or an herb or something, to enter in touch with that dust from the gopis in general and in connection to Sri Radha in particular. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his own commentary, he's mentioning here, paraphrasing Uddhava, that as it has been proved that the gopis' love is the most rare to attain, Uddhava is thinking for himself, it will be improper to desire it. Therefore, it was with lack of judgment that I have said, that Mahabhav which those desiring liberation, the liberated and devotees like me, hanker after. And he mentioned this in the first verse of the Uddhava-gita. So he expressed, I desire that Mahabhav. But now, Uddhava realizes, with proper consideration, let me correctly express my desire. This is too much for me. I cannot aspire for that. So let me be born as a blade of grass in Braj. That's his ultimate petition. He will speak about being a bush, a creeper, or an herb, a blade of grass in Braj. Why not, for example, a tree? The trees are quite tall in Braj. So it is said that they are quite tall, so it's difficult for them to take the dust from the gopis' feet. Therefore, they say that Uddhava first mentioned, again, shrubs, then creepers and grasses, in that particular order, because they are successfully lower to the ground, closer to the ground, so therefore more capable to receive the foot dust of the gopis and Radha in particular. So his strongest desire, his last conclusive, ultimate petition is, let me be a blade of grass, quite connected to Mahaprabhu's instructing us, Trinadapi Sunichena, how to become like a blade of grass. So this is also showing Uddhava's humility. And to make this point even stronger, some sadhus will mention that Uddhava is eternally residing on the bank of Kusha Sarovar in Vrindavan as one of these forms he's praying for here, as a gulmalat, as a creeper, as a blade of grass, in one place called Uddhava Kunda. As we mentioned the other day, last week, Lakshmi Devi till now is in Belvan executing tapasya, trying to enter Rasa Lila, but she cannot. Somehow these type of ideas are made. Till now, Uddhava is there trying to make his point, if you will, for eternity. So Vishwanath Thakur then continues, paraphrasing Suyuddha and saying, every night the Braja Gopis give up all shame, their respectable upbringing and religious codes, which are as hard as thunderbolts to break, and run off to meet Krishna. And at the time of returning home, they are completely oblivious as to whether they are following the right footpath or not. In that state, where they are totally intoxicated by prem, they will place their blessed feet upon my head, which will be present here in the form of some blade of grass. As for now, Uddhava concludes, even though I pitifully beg for it millions of times, put your feet on my head, the gopis are not willing to do that. They are not willing to put their feet on my head. Therefore, my life will be successful only if I'm born as a blade of grass in Vrindavan. Therefore, he's presenting this very intense prayer. Let me be born in that particular form, even though it seems insignificant. It's totally glorious. This person, the greatest sage on earth, is praying to be one blade of grass and grass. So what must be the position? So it's important to think for a minute about what he's mentioning here, how the gopis are dismissing, giving up, all those things that are almost impossible to live for almost every person, for the sake of Krishna. So the gopis have abandoned their families, all concerned with religious principles, only to engage in anukul seva, favorable offering of themselves unto Krishna, even without expecting to obtain him. They do not have full warranty that they will obtain him. As we know, their situation is quite complex in Parakya. Many of them are married, so many obstacles. So they do not know we will meet Krishna, we will marry Krishna as they will like. But nonetheless, they are willing to risk everything, every single day, every single night, for serving the flute call, if you will. So lot to learn for us as sadhakas. So they are casting aside everything that is ordinarily valuable, precious, choosing themselves to devote themselves to Mukunda Padavim, this verse says. Mukunda Padavim, the lotus feet of Sri Mukunda. Or some of our acharyas mentioned, if we understand the word Padavim more literally as referring to footpath, then therefore the conclusion is that Mukunda Padavim means that the gopis eagerly go out morning and evening to watch the footpath, the path that Krishna used to walk on when he went to the forest and when he returned to the forest, and they will identify the markings of his feet on every single lila that is connected to every footmark, how he was standing and walking. All of that has some emotional connotation that the gopis can perceive through the eyes of their bhava. Also, an interesting notion here is Bhramara-gita. Bhramara-gita here indicates that the Vedas can actually only strive to achieve the prema of the gopis, but they cannot achieve it. The Vedas are after Braj. Therefore, even though the Vedas are universal teachers of all principles of dharma, religion, and universal spiritual knowledge about the difference between body and soul and different yogas, forms of transcendence, at the same time, it's totally fitting that the gopis take no heed of Vedic authority, actually, and in fact, they are abandoning Vedic principles for the sake of obtaining that which is the most precious thing, which is something that the Vedas themselves can hardly obtain, basically. So the Vedas are merely seeking Krishna, but the gopis fully have him, fully possess Krishna. So they are the personification, sarva dharma parityaja mamekam sharanam, leaving aside all dharmic, religious consideration in pursuit of the highest form of mystic union, exclusively to Krishna. And as Krishna says in the Gita, Traigunya Visaya Vedanis Traigunya Vavarjana. Reject all the things that the Vedas are saying and come to me. So this idea of Braj, While the Vedas and the Upanishads glorify Krishna after Krishna, the Brajavasis have Krishna, possess Krishna more than anyone else. Traya Upanishad Discha Sankhya Yogasya Satyatai Bhagiyamana Mahatmya Harim Samanya Tatmajam. Says the Vastu Nirdesh Shloka of the Krishna Lila according to Vishwanath Chakravarti. All Vedas and Upanishads speak Krishna is the absolute, Krishna is God, but they are after him. While Jashoda, he says, no, Krishna is not God, he is my son. And she has him trapped in her lap. So who is more right of the two? Who is more accurate in their conclusion? The Vedas or Jashoda or the Brajavasis or the Bhagavatam? That's why for us the Bhagavatam is the ultimate scriptural authority, which is in one sense beyond the reach of the Vedas. Shrutam api panishadam durei harikatam. So Vedas say Krishna is God, Brajavasis says he's not. Vedas are after Krishna, Brajavasis fully give form to Krishna with their love. So that's the conclusion that's why these verse of the Bhagavatam that I just quote is considered like the Vastu Nirdesh Shloka, around which all the Krishna Lila is turning around circumambulating this notion of, for the Brajavasis, Krishna is not God, but they possess Krishna by the strength of that intimacy more than anyone else. So, at this point, one may question maybe, aren't all the devotees of Krishna equally glorious for having renounced their families or whatever else prevents them from approaching Krishna? And of course, the answer is yes, but at the same time, Buddha wants to make another point in relation to how the intimacy of the gopis surrender to Krishna in the context of Parakya Bhav makes them special. So the next verse, the penultimate song, is presented as a proof of this. So let's go to the verse 62, of this chapter, which is the 5th verse of the Bhagavad-gita. Gavai Sri Architamayadi Vidatta Kamaya Yogeshwarirapi Sadatma Nirasya Goshmi Vishnasya Tat Bhagavata Prapadara Vindam Nyastam Sanisu Vijahu Parirabhyatapam. Sri Uddhava says, the goddess of fortune herself, along with Lord Brahma and all the other demigods who are masters of yogic perfection, can worship the lotus feet of Krishna only within her mind. But during the Rasa dance, Sri Krishna placed his feet upon these gopis' breasts, and by embracing those feet, the gopis gave up all distress. So somehow this verse resembles what is established in the 3rd verse of this Bhagavad-gita, where Sri Uddhava Mahasaya is invoking the notion of Rasa Lila and at the same time the situation of Lakshmi and how the gopis, by being allowed to enter the Rasa Lila, are in a much deeper and higher position than Lakshmi herself. So in this verse, Uddhava is glorifying the Mahabhava of the gopis, which in this case he presents as inaccessible to other great personalities, starting with Brahma, other devas, and including again Lakshmi, as I mentioned, so re-establishing the supremacy of the gopis and Radha in particular above Lakshmi, the supremacy of Rasa Lila above any other Lila. The implication is Gopyas Tapaki Macharadas, the ladies of Mathura says in chapter 44. What type of worship must the gopis have performed to obtain such a Krishna? Remember, every different form of Krishna is carved by a particular type of love from their devotees. So when the ladies of Mathura see Krishna, such a beautiful person, they are wondering what type of worship the gopis have performed. They have him like nobody else has him. So after Krishna, remember, they are speaking about Rasa Lila here, Sridhar. So after Krishna left the gopis, at the beginning of the Rasa Lila, the gopis spent some time vividly remembering the very feet, those feet of Krishna in the ecstasy of separation. Tanmanaskas tadalapas tadvichesas tadadmika tadmunam bhagayantyonatmaga. They thought about Krishna, they sang about him, they imitated his fashion, and they felt tadadmya, the mystical unity with Krishna's mood and so on in separation, maddening separation. So these lotus feet were the same feet that are worshipped by Sri or Lakshmi. But the gopis realized Krishna's feet in a special way, as the feet that belong to the darling son of Nanda and Yashoda, basically, with a very different conception than that of Srimati Lakshmi herself. And the gopis took those lotus feet and took them to their breasts, to their hearts, repeatedly during Rasa Lila, and therefore the distress of the separation, forced fire separation, was relieved. They were completely relieved of that pain. Generally, this type of symbol, the gopis taking Krishna's feet to their hearts, are a very symptom of or image of prem. And sometimes our acharyas speak about prem. They will quote one famous verse, the last verse from the Bhramara-gita. Yatesu jattachala namburu hamsanesu vitaisane priyadadi mahi karakasesu tinata vimatasya yatatena kimsu utpadipir brahmatidir bhavamayu samna. Where the gopis are thinking, just by thinking about Krishna's soft foot soles walking barefoot on the forest every day, our mind gets so tortured by thinking how his lotus feet are pricked and hurt by little twigs and stones in the forest. So we suffer so much that we want to offer the softest part of our body, which is our breast, so he can put his feet there and experience some relief. But also, when we think about the softness of those feet in comparison to our breasts still are hard and harsh and not very pleasing, but it's the softest part we have available. So what we can do? So in this way, the gopis are suffering by trying to relieve Krishna and provide him some pleasurable service. Sanatana Goswami, on his side, in his commentary, he mentions that the order of the persons quoted here, like Brahma and other devas and master of yoga and eventually Lakshmi, go from inferior to superior, starting from Brahma. So Sanatana Goswami says that because the feet that the gopis worshipped were the feet of Bhagavan in the form of Krishna, the gopis are superior to the demigods who are headed by Brahma. And because the gopis touched those feet directly, the gopis are superior to self-satisfied sages, Atmaramas. And because the gopis held those feet to their breasts, the gopis are even superior to masters of yoga. And because the association of the gopis with Krishna occurred during the Rasa Lila, the gopis are superior even to Mahalakshmi. So in this way we have this type of sequence or hierarchy where the gopis are superior to everyone else, basically. That's what Buddha is saying. Starting from the Devas, Brahma, headed by Brahma, and all the other demigods, to all these different types of possibilities among masters of yoga and sages, and even up to the greatest lady devotee, generally popularly known as Lakshmi. Above herself are the gopis Sri Radha uniquely. So this is a similar notion that we will find in verse 10:38-8 of the Bhagavatam. You can look for that one as well, where Akrura is praying there, and similarly establishing the ultimate supremacy of the Braja Gopikas. So, that said, let's go to the last verse of the Bhagavad-gita, 6th verse, which is verse 63 of this 47th chapter, and which is the verse that generally I recite when we are about to finish each of our sessions of the Bhramara-gita as well. Monde nanda rajastrinam padarena vishnasam yasam harikatodhitam punati bhuvanathrayam. So Buddha is saying, I repeatedly offer my respects to the dust from the feet of the woman of Nanda Maharaj's covered village. When these gopis loudly chant the glories of Sri Krishna, the vibration purifies the three worlds. So this is Buddha's last statement in the Bhagavad-gita. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur paraphrases Buddha here, where he's saying that he offers his respect again to the foot dust of the Braja Gopikas continuously As long as I do not get a birth as a blade of grass, as he prayed for before, which will make it easy to get the food dust. So as long as they are not blessing me with the birth, one birth as a blade of grass and brush, I will keep putting my head to the ground and trying to contact the lotus feet, dust feet from the Brajagopis. So in this verse we find the word padarenum, abhikshanasaha, which has to do that I offer my perpetual pranam to the lotus feet of the gopis. So here we find the affix sa, abhikshana sa. So sa indicates, according to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, perpetually. So Uddhava engages in this divine exercise perpetually. Not Vishwanath says not just 3 or 5 times a day, not like in a calculated, counted way. I offer some pranams per day to the dust of the feet of the gopis, but I project myself to perpetually engage in such a practice. Also, Padarenum, Abhikshanasa, Padarenum here interestingly is in singular. So with this, the implication is that Uddhava is trying to convey the notion that he feels himself not even capable of describing the glory of even only one particle of this dust from Braj. And that's why he uses the singular. He's not speaking about the dust in plural, the dust of Braj, but even one single particle of dust there, it's above my head. He's implying. He, the greatest devotee and sage, Krishna himself establishing his own minister. But he's saying this land, this soil is made of such a substance that even the dust is qualitatively above my own head. That's what Srila Siddha Maharaj mentions over and over again. The land of faith. We are trying to enter into a land whose dust is made of a substance that is categorically higher than our own constitution. So we should be ready to enter there, offering our pranama, walking with our head on the ground and our feet up, basically like in Sirsasana, offering pranam to everything started by the foot dust. So Uddhava is saying this. Again, remember, Uddhava generally is declared that among Krishna's devotees, Uddhava is the best. He's famous for that. He has that reputation. Krishna himself says in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, Tvam tu bhagavate saham. Among the devotees, I am Uddhava. He always says this type of things. Among rivers and this, among animals and that. Among devotees, I am Uddhava, he says in the Bhagavatam. But here we find Uddhava praising and praying for the gopis' supreme law. So the greatest devotee is pointing to a greatest devotee. So if the greatest devotee says so, like Uddhava, he must be correct. And since Krishna says, I am Uddhava, Krishna himself is saying the same thing, therefore. Krishna himself agrees with Uddhava's opinion. The highest type of love is that of the gopis and that of Sri Radha in particular. And Krishna himself would make that very clear in his appearance as Srimad Mahaprabhu, Chaitanya Devaki Jai, where he was just fully dedicated to systematically relish Radha's love and to spread that experience around the world somehow. Srila Sanatana Goswami Pad, in his own commentary, he very beautifully gives us a picture of that put in context, gives a proper stage for this verse. So he says, after thus taking great satisfaction from sweetly singing the glories of the gopis, Uddhava falls flat on the ground, on the very path their lotus feet have touched. Picking a speck of dust from the path, he places it on his head as if it were the rarest treasure in the universe. And after offering again his prostrate ovations, he recites this final prayer. So again, remember what we spoke last week. It's so important to give ourselves some place for disciplined, contextualized imagination. In the context of revelation, what we hear from Shastra, we have some place for imagining, for visualizing those scenarios that are being revealed to us by our Purvacharyas. So here the Goswamis are helping us in trying to make a clear picture of what's going on. It's not just about learning a verse, memorizing it, learning by heart, repeating that as a parrot, but entering into the verse, entering into the emotional content of each sloka, of each section of the Bhagavatam. And sometimes we need this, like the Goswamis are extending, expanding the stage in which the verse is mentioned. So in this way, Uddhava is fully absorbed in ecstasy, Srila Sanatana Prabhu continues, to the point that he is not, even though he can see the gopis who are reciting this last verse, he's speaking and offering homage to them with deep reverence, as if the gopis were not present, basically. Like in third person. The gopis of Braj, and they are there. Or also Sanatana Goswami, as we already mentioned, says that Uddhava is speaking indirectly in third person about the gopis out of respect, indicating the gopis' great position, or he may be speaking indirectly because the gopis, due to their natural humility, will be ashamed of hearing direct glorification of them in their humility, and they feel themselves to be ordinary village ladies, nothing more than that. So they will not tolerate like someone like Uddhava who will be praising them in the way he's doing. But some possibilities of why Uddhava express this verse in third person. And full humility, Uddhava is being totally like immersed, basically drowning in an ocean of deep humility by having darshan of the gopis' love and by thinking about the grace that Krishna has shown to him by sending him to Braj. So Sanatana Goswami further paraphrases Uddhava. Thus, he's saying, I am completely unqualified for such direct service to the Lord as the one the gopis are offering. Uddhava thinks, I will simply offer respects to the gopis to attain such bhava. Or what qualification do I have to sing the glories of such persons? I offer respect to one particle of their fruit dust which has fallen somewhere. In other words, Uddhava is so much again invaded by humility that he feels it's not even I'm not worthy even to offer pranam to the gopis directly. So I will perpetually offer pranam to one particle of the dust of the lotus feet, and that's even above my head. I have to begin somewhere. What to do? And also by extension, he's offering Braja Bandinanda Brajastrina, pranam to all the ladies in Vrindavan. Sanatana Goswami also mentioned that Uddhava is saying, I offer respect to the feet of the women of Braj. What to speak of those women who are dearest to him. Because all Braja women are related to these gopis, I offer respect to all of them. Of course, all women in Braj are gopis mostly, but here he's glorifying the gopis who serve Krishna in Madhurya Bhav, Parakya Bhav more specifically. But since the other gopis somehow are connected with the gopis here, therefore Uddhava is praising all of the women of Braj, Vandinanda Brajastrina. Even some indigenous, if you will, tribal ladies like the Pulindas and other tribes from the outskirts of Braj, they are glorified, including in this notion of Bandinanda Brajastrina, for having some connection with the gopis. So, and the verse concludes by saying, Uddhava is saying, and the kirtan of the gopis is so powerful that the three universes are blessed by it. So apart from glorifying the gopis kirtan as the best here, similarly there is some similar statement in 46th chapter, 46th verse of this 10th canto. Apart from that, what Uddhava also implies here is that any suitable praise of the gopis, such as the Srimad-Bhagavatam, the prayers he has just sung, actually constitute in fact the most excellent form of Harikatha. In other words, there is some gradation of Harikatha, if we will. We're going to speak about more introductory basic Harikatha, and we might not be even speaking directly about Hari himself, but establishing the foundational cornerstones of our Siddhanta, speaking about Tattva, philosophy, and some introductory notions, to lay the foundation for the temple of divine love of Bhava, Rasa, and Lila. So eventually, we will be able to speak about Hari more directly, and specifically about Krishna and Braj, and specifically about his devotees and the love of his devotees for him, and the different degrees of love, objectively speaking. So in this sense, we can speak about different levels of Harikatha, as much as we enter and have the adhikar, both the speaker and the audience, for describing in detail Lila, Bhava, and Rasa, and so on, which all of that has to be presented in a tasteful way, in the context of Tattva and Siddhanta as well. So, such glorification, it is said that of the gopis, or such glorification, such Harikatha basically can easily purify the three worlds, as Uddhava is hoping to do by speaking these verses. In other words, his Srimad-Bhagavatam, his Harikatha, his glorification of Braja Bhav, Gopi Bhav, is in itself the highest form of praise, which blesses, purifies the whole world. Sometimes this notion is there. All these planetary systems are sustained by the Harikata of the saintly people. All the planets remain in their orbit, only by the presence and songs and prayers of sadhus. If not, Bhumi Devi and other presiding deities of different planets won't be able to deal with the burden of sinful activities and so many degradations, especially in this particular age. But due to the Harikata and so on, the whole galaxy is being blessed and sustained, basically. So, that said, some brief words about the remaining 3 verses, and with this completing our Uddhava Gita. But I would like to share, if you give me permission during some minutes, some further words as a conclusion to this Uddhava Gita. So, in this way, Uddhava, just before leaving Vrindavan, he spoke these 6 verses here, praising the gopis with full tears of love, trembling voice, choked throat. He presented like again, drunk word, humblebee, his glorious Uddhava Gita. Sanatana Goswami very nicely described this condition and how Uddhava was affected by the darshan of the Braja Gopis, and Radha in particular, and the Bhramara-gita in particular. Remember, this is like an extension of the Bhramara-gita, like an epilogue of the Bhramara-gita. Sanatana Goswami said, by displaying the all attractive transformations of their viraha bhav, of their love in separation, basically, the gopis deprived Uddhava of his wisdom by vanquishing his sobriety. So Uddhava came to Braj like a very sober sage, equipped with Gyan, with Aishwarya, with Siddhanta, but his sense of conclusive knowledge here became upgraded. He was thinking Krishna is God, Brahman, Paramatma, but when meeting the Brajavasi, he realized there is something more to it. And he came like a very sober minister of the Prince Krishna, but he ended up being like for a year, like a crazy guy fellow, like a one-word buzzing, like a bumblebee drinking the wine of the Brajavasis Katha and association. So all this happened by his Sangha, especially with the Brajavasis and with the Gopis in particular, and with Sri Radha even more specifically. And Sanatana Goswami mentions in connection to Uddhava witnessing this viraha bhav, that the ecstasy that the Gopis feel in separation from Krishna makes the whole world cry in sympathy and brings Vaishnavas to the verge of death. Because the Gopis themselves remain in the verge of death, so Vaishnavas empathize with their condition, following their footsteps, and the whole world cry in symphony with that, in sympathy. Since the whole creation, Srishti Leela has as a background Radha Krishna Leela. So in this way, Bhramara-gita is concluding here, although Bhramara-gita officially lasts for 10 verses, which we already studied, but if we want, we can speak of an extended version of the Bhramara-gita, which includes the Gopis' reply to the Bhramara-gita, Uddhava's messages, Krishna's message through Uddhava, in reply to the Bhramara-gita, the Gopis reply to that message, and now Uddhava's prayers, Uddhava Gita, which could be in a more generous way become part as this extended natural consequence of the Bhramara-gita. So this Uddhava Gita that we have just finished basically represent these heartfelt prayers from Uddhava to the Gopis expressing his gratitude, appreciation, and aspiration, as we mentioned him. He's a very unique case. He has a Sthayi Bhav. He wants his Sthayi Bhav to be affected and upgraded by association with the Brajavasis. So again, as we mentioned, he's the most exalted Vedic scholar, a very confidential friend of Sri Krishna outside of Braj. But he here is praying with folded hands. May the Gopis bless me in some lifetime, maybe not in this one, in some lifetime with their foot dust, if by chance I have to get the chance of being born in Braj as a little creeper. So in this way, Uddhava returned to Krishna, as we will see in the next lecture, in the next session. He returned to Mathura, having received very powerful samskar, having experienced some epiphany moment, some conversion, if you will, especially from Sri Radha, more specifically, especially from the Gopis, and more specifically from Sri Radha. So before finishing, I would like to share with you some verses from Srimad-Bhagavatam, which are not including Uddhava here, but it's a dialogue between Narada and Gopakumar. Narada Muni is the one speaking here actually. But all of this is very connected to what we are seeing here, to how Uddhava was transformed by being a witness of Prem personified in the form of the Brajavas and Sri Radha in particular. So let me share. These are verses just in case. 226 till 234 from the 5th chapter from the 2nd canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam for those who would like to read them. So I will read the first ones here. So Narada is saying to Gopakumar, Dear brother, those who know Prem recognize its Swarup. Its external symptoms, such as trembling, arise from melting of the heart. For those who have Prem, the blazing conflagration of their agony is like the nectarian water of the Jamuna, and the Jamuna becomes like the burning flames of a fire. To them, poison is like nectar, and nectar like poison. Death is happiness, and life becomes full of misery. Because of Prem, one cannot clearly tell the difference between union and separation. One cannot distinguish whether Prem is full of the greatest ecstasy or the worst anguish. When Prem matures, one inevitably acts from time to time in the ways of an utter madman. And without such Prem, not even the 9 kinds of bhakti, Shravan, Kirtan, and so on, to Lord Mukunda can bring real happiness. Indeed, without Prem, the 9 kinds of bhakti are like vegetables without salt, an elaborate meal without hunger, scriptural study without understanding, or gardens without fruit. I am saying something general about this Prem, but it cannot be described in full detail. How can I adequately tell of the nature of Prem the woman of Braj had for Krishna? When Krishna went to Mathura city, the cowherd women were plunged at once into a state more intense than the fire of universal annihilation. The cause of this state was Prem. This condition is the Swarup of Prem. Do not desire further information about the Swarup of Prem. Sanatan Goswami, his purport kind of extends the last part saying, by describing the details, you and I will have danger of entering a special state. We may even die. So after giving this general description of the nature, the Swarup of Prem, we have 2 more verses remaining, 233 and 234. The Narada says to Gopakumar, if ever you meet Sri Radhika, then you will see Prem in person. And if ever she speaks about Prem, only then can you hear the truth about it, if you are able to understand it. So here we are getting closer to what actually Uddhava himself has gone through. Sanatan Goswami comments on this, mentioning that by seeing a person with such Prem, as Uddhava did, you will realize it directly. If it is possible that Radha describes that Prem, then you will hear about its nature, composed of the highest bliss and the highest lamentation and suffering, if you have the ability to hear it. Like implying, this is not an easy task. Whether to describe it, to understand it, to hear it. Radha cannot describe the Swarup of Prem. Since she is always in a state of great ummad, or madness, by the manifestation of the highest continual love. Another person who has Prem will not be able to speak about Prem, since he or she will faint because of his Prem. The Swarup of Prem will be understood from directly seeing the characteristics of that great Prem which manifests in her at all times when you see her. So again, this is what has happened just now to Uddhava. He had witnessed Radha Prem in full measure, full glowing state in the Bhramara-gita. So now he's returning totally affected by it to Mathura. Further will affect Krishna himself there. So in the last verse of this section of Srimad-Bhagavatam, verse 234, Narada says to Gopakumar, after having said, remember, if you ever meet Sri Radhika, then you will see Prem in person, and if ever she speaks about Prem, only then you can hear the truth about it if you are able to understand it. And now the last verse says, or should there ever be a full incarnation of Sri Krishna Chandra to distribute pure Krishna Prem, or if Srimati Radhika appears and attains a realization of that Prem, you might be able to understand it. So you may imagine what's the meaning of this. Sanatana Goswami himself comments here. He says, if Krishna were to appear and distribute Prem directed to him, which is similar to what was described, or similar to Radha's Prem, or even better, he says, if Radha were to appear and attain a realization of that Prem, then you will understand. So, of course, conclusion here is Jai Gaur, Srimad Mahaprabhu ki Jai, which is that full incarnation, Mahavatar of Sri Krishna Chandra, Mahaprabhu, who is not an avatar, but is Swami Bhagavan himself, distributing Krishna Prem, which none other avatar is doing. Krishna Prem Pradayati, that's the Leela of Mahaprabhu. He's tasting and distributing this Krishna Prem. Or then the verse says, if Radha herself appeared to attain a realization of the Prem, which is a way of saying Mahaprabhu again, because Mahaprabhu is Krishna, but in the mode of Sri Radha, trying to taste the fullness of that Radha Bhav, and as a consequence of that, sharing that, overflowing and sharing that with the world. So, by the grace of Srimad Mahaprabhu, we as sadhakas, Radha Noble sadhakas, have the hope and opportunity to understand that Prem by witnessing that Prem in those sadhus, members of our parampara, who are bearing witness to that Prem that is coming from the line of Srimad Mahaprabhu, Panchatatma, his associates, down in parampara, and by Sri Guru's grace, we have the chance of witnessing this type of great personalities affected by that, and have the hope to understand something about this Prem. And so again, we see how nicely this section of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, which is totally connected to what we have been sharing in the Bhramara-gita, makes full circle and lands at the feet of Srimad Mahaprabhu, which is the conclusion of the Bhagavatam, if you will. The high point of the Bhagavatam leaves us at the feet of Srimad Mahaprabhu. So once over and over again, as Gaudias, we are to engage in this type of discipline, connecting Krishna Leela, Gaur Leela, and seeing this Gaur Leela as the highest fulfillment of the need person in Krishna Leela. So in this way, Uddhav Mahasaya is, before leaving Vrindavan, expressing his gratitude to the gopis through this Sudha-gita. By your manifestation of love and separation, again, he has witnessed that, especially in the case of Sri Radha, he's feeling, you have been so great, merciful to me, showing all these varieties of Mahabhav, expressions such as Chitrajal, Padibyan Mad, crazy talks, divine madness. And if you, Uddhav says to Radha, if you, especially Radha, had not experienced this separation from Krishna, had not sung this Bhramara-gita, Krishna would have not sent me here. He sent me here because he knew that you will be experiencing that, and I could witness that and be totally blessed with that. So if you have not did that, I would not have observed this great wonder, Chamatkar. I will have witnessed this high point of the Bhramara-gita. So in this way, Uddhav describes the extent of his good fortune. So it is described by some of our acharyas that this pastime where Uddhav is singing the Uddhav-gita before leaving Braj occurred during the mid-morning, called Purvana Lila, between 8:36 a.m. till 10:48 a.m., before Uddhav's return to Mathura. Next class we will explain that. But before finishing, let's offer our pranam to Sriman Uddhav Mahasaya, because due to him also we have witnessed many of these wonders, and we have heard from his lotus lips also the great Uddhav-gita. So we will invoke one verse from Raghunath Das Goswami's Braja Vilas Tava, verse 99, where he offers along this book pranam to different inhabitants of Raj, and interestingly he includes Uddhav, one of them, because he became an inhabitant of Raj in his own way. So I will quote this verse first in Sanskrit, and then we will go to the translation. It says like this. Purna prema rasai sadanuraripo dasasaka chapriyam Sapranarabhuvato pitatpadajugan hitve hamasandasa prityayo samsariya kathaya gostam muhurjivayati ayatam kila pasya krishna mititam murdna bahanyabhavam. Sri Das Goswamiji says, Sri Uddhav Mahasaya, who is always filled with flavors of love for Murari, both as a servant and friend, left the Lord's lotus feet, although they are dearer to him than billions of life pearls, and stayed in Braj for 10 months, consoling and reviving the Brajavasis by saying, Look, Krishna is coming back to you. I carry this Sri Uddhav on my head. Sriman Uddhav Mahasaya ki jai. And last but not least, we will invoke again this last verse of the Bhagavad-gita where Sriman Uddhav Mahasaya offer pranam to the foot dust of the gopis and to their kirtan, perpetually putting his head on the ground, since that kirtan has the potential of purifying the three worlds, and therefore he prays with the hope of being touched, sprinkled by such thing. Vande Nanda Brajasrinam Padarenam Abhikshnasam Yasam Harikatodgitam Punati Bhuvanatrim. Thank you so much for your time and presence as usual. And since I'm not streaming this lecture live, there is no place, unfortunately, for live questions, but you can leave any question you have in the threads where this streaming will be public, this video will be published, and we will continue our conversation along the week. So see you next Monday. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Srimad Mahaprabhu ki jai, Sri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Grantaraj Srimad-Bhagavatam ki jai, Sri Bhramara-gita ki jai, Sri Uddhav-gita ki jai, Gaur Bhakta-vrinda ki jai, Gaur Niman Hari Guru. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyaiva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo. Ananta koti vaishnava vrinda ki jai, Gaur Hari Guru.